Welcome back to the classroom. Today's topic is the study of BIOS. This video is sponsored by Genreviews.online. Genreviews.online is one of the review portal sites. What is BIOS? BIOS, which stands for Basic Input Output System, is a program that activates when you power on your computer. It is the initial software that runs during the startup process responsible for identifying, configuring, and testing the hardware components of your computer as well as linking them to the operating system. BIOS is transferring the data between operating system and connected devices including the keyboard, mouse, and hardware drive. It conducts a series of diagnostic checks to verify that everything is functioning correctly. The first of these checks is the power on self-test, which evaluates your peripheral devices. If the power on self-test fails, the computer will not boot properly. You can access the BIOS setup utility to modify hardware settings on your computer, such as the time. The primary function of BIOS is to serve as an intermediary between operating systems and the hardware they operate on. It consistently acts as the link between the microprocessor and the control information and data flow of input-output devices. In certain situations, BIOS can enable direct data transfer from devices such as graphic cards to memory for improved performance. BIOS is included with computers as firmware embedded on a chip on the motherboard. Operating systems like Windows or iOS can either come with pre-installed by the manufacturer or vendor or be installed by the user. BIOS is a program stored on a erasable programmable read-only memory chip EEPROM that is accessible to the microprocessor. When a user powers on their computer, the microprocessor hands over control to the BIOS program, which is always located at the same address in EEPROM. Starting up a computer, BIOS first checks to ensure that all necessary hardware components are connected and functioning properly. Any hardware that contains files essential for the computer to boot is referred to as a boot device. After verifying that the boot devices are operational, BIOS loads the operating system into the computer's random access memory RAM from a hard drive. BIOS is stored on a small memory chip located on the motherboard of your system. BIOS is responsible for identifying, configuring, testing, and connecting the computer's hardware to the operating system when powered on. This sequence of actions is known as the boot process. These functions are performed by the four primary roles of BIOS. Number 1. Power on self-test. This checks the computer hardware before the OS is loaded. Number 2. Bootstrap loader. This finds the OS. 3. Software or drivers. This identifies the software and drivers that work with the OS once it is running. Number 4. Complementary metal oxide semiconductor CMOS. This is a configuration tool that allows users to modify hardware and system settings. CMOS refers to BIOS non-volatile memory. Next is the study of accessing BIOS. BIOS allows the OS and its application to operate without needing to know specific details such as the hardware addresses of connected input-output devices. When these device details change, only the BIOS program needs to be updated, which can sometimes be done during system setup. Users can access and configure BIOS through the BIOS setup utility. The method for accessing this utility can vary slightly depending on the computer model, but the following steps generally help users enter and configure BIOS through the setup utility. Restart or turn off the computer. When it powers back on, watch for a message that says entering setup or something similar. This message will indicate a key that you need to press to access the system configuration. For example, you might see a message like press to enter BIOS setup. Common keys used for this purpose include del, tab, escape, and the function keys like F1 to F12. As soon as you see the prompt, quickly press the indicated key. Once you are in the BIOS setup utility, you can modify hardware settings, manage memory configurations, adjust the boot order or boot device, and reset the BIOS password among other configuration options. Regarding BIOS security, it is often overlooked in the cybersecurity, but it is important to manage it to prevent hackers from running malicious code on the operating system. Another distinctive vulnerability related to BIOS manipulation was plundervault. This exploit could interface with a computer's power supply while data was being written to memory, resulting in errors that created security vulnerabilities. In response, Intel issued a BIOS update to protect against it. This is a brief study of BIOS.